Thank you everyone for joining us today. On behalf of the Alumni Association, warm welcome to all of you. It's nice to see full rooms at the ACG as well, and I'm guessing more alumni will join us on the Google Meet. My name is Harsha Subramaniam. I belong to the first batch of the ACGA from 2001. Um, I think, as many of you know, June of last year, the ACG Alumni Association was came into being. A bunch of us were inducted into the what is called the executive committee. 11 of us to be precise, 9 executive committee members, 9 of us were students, two ACGA professors. We committed ourselves to a 12-point charter of guiding principles. The core objective really was to get everyone together, keep this community engaged, networked, and vibrant, which is why we are conducting events like these. In October last year, we did our first event where we brought in 4 prominent women journalists to a event that took place at the ACJ campus in Chennai on women shaping journalism. That went off very well, and this is our second event. And this is our first online event where we've got 2 prominent journalists turned entrepreneurs on a very different kind of a conversation. We're calling this series called Beyond the Byline. I'm going to call my colleagues Vrinda and Ranjit, who are committee members, who are also alumni, and who are going to be hosting this program today. But before I do that, I do have a request, particularly for the alumni on this call. If you have any suggestions, feedback on what we can do better, please let us know. If you're willing to contribute in any fashion with your time or resources, we'd love to hear from you. Um, with that, I will now hand it over to Vrinda to take on the proceedings. Vrinda.
Thank you, Harsha, and welcome everybody to the first ever, we hope, in the long series of Beyond the Bylines. Today we are joined by Mr. Parry Ravindranathan and Mr. Joji Thomas Phillip. They are both ACG alumnus and they are both really trailblazers in their own field. We are going to start by having a chat with Parry. He's the CEO and founder of Converge. It's a dynamic fintech startup. I really hope you guys go online and find out more about it. I'm going to let the students think and come back with more questions. But thank you so much, Parry, for making time. You've been at the forefront of driving innovation in fintech, but you've also been a big supporter of ACJ. You're one of those who started the Bloomberg project. So my first question is your journey from college to being the first managing director of Bloomberg Media and then a successful startup entrepreneur. What's the inspiration behind this?
So I'm a very young entrepreneur in the sense that I'm not, unlike Joji, I've been doing this only for 2.5 years or so, 3 years. So I'm a very young entrepreneur, I've just started the journey. Though I've been in media for quite a long time. My current startup's not in media. For anyone who does, go and check what Converge does. We are not in media, it's in the fintech space. But my journey, obviously, when journalism started with ACJ, I owe a lot to ACJ. Me and Harsha were classmates and colleagues twice. So I started in ACJ, and then I went to the UK to study, and then I got my first job. With CNN, and then I moved to TV18 when it was just starting out. That's where Harsha and I were colleagues. And then I went to Al Jazeera English. That's where, in a lot of ways, I blossomed as a journalist, I think. And then went to Bloomberg. And Bloomberg was slightly different in the sense that I ran both the newsroom as well as the business. So that was quite new. I'd never done that before. It was, I spent almost nearly 11 years in Bloomberg, running both the Asia business initially and then everything outside the US, both the business and the newsroom for most of my time there. And then in 2020, I left Bloomberg, and I was, I would have probably stayed back in the media business, but something came up and I got an opportunity to do something with my co-founder who was with Visa. I would probably not have attempted it if he was not from that world, the payment world. And then I'm now running a payment startup, so in the B2B payment space. So yeah, that's kind of in as condensed form as I can give it, my journey since ACJ. So
Okay, that's really inspiring because I mean the room full of students there and all of us we've been through many jobs and opportunities, and one's always apprehensive on what do you stay away from and what do you hop onto. Uh, for the advantage of everybody else, we know that the fintech space has been rapidly evolving, and there are advancements in AE, blockchain, especially in digital payments. In line of Converge, what are the trends or innovations that you are most excited about, especially in the Indian or South Asian context?
I think if I don't say AI, I probably will be out of date already. So I'm going to say AI. I think there is a huge change going on, at least in the world my company is in, where there's a lot of automation going on. We are in a
Mhm.
very niche space, that is B2B payments, that sort of sits, even within B2B payments, we are a very niche sort of setups. Our clients are all banks, so we are sort of invisible in some ways. But what we are seeing, at least from an innovation point of view, is you're seeing a huge change in automation pretty much across functions, across banks, across functions, and there's an eagerness to actually to automate everything. And that automation is AI ML essentially, and you're already seeing that already disrupting the space to an extent. I mean, and you're seeing these large networks like Visa and Mastercard, who we work with, changing themselves. And I think what in the next few years, I don't think what we are doing now will be recognizable in few years' time, because the way the innovation curve is moving, and almost everything is becoming automated. So I think AI is probably the single biggest automation. Also on the other side, I think where we deal a lot with the government, with very regulated entities. You're seeing regulation struggling to catch up with that, and I think eventually it will start catching up. And we are seeing that is a big challenge and a gap as well, because innovation is moving much faster in regulation, as it always does. So those are the
That's a
two I
very
can
fair
think of.
point, and I think it's valid for the students as well. A year ago, when we were in ACJ, we were discussing AI's role in journalism, in content and media. So I'm sure the regulation will catch up in a very positive way. I do have to ask, what is it that you learned at ACJ? Because we had this conversation where we said journalists are very good client-facing people. They have empathy and they understand situations. What is it that you learned at ACJ that the students should try to take an example from and include in their curriculums or extras?
I'm sure the curriculum is nearly. I'm sure there's no similarity between the curriculum we had and what's now. I mean,
It's
I
adapted.
was part of the new media stream. It was still called new media then. I don't think
Me
it should be
too. It
called
was
new
called
anymore.
vocation.
Exactly. So it was very new then. So that just tells you how far we have moved. It's now digital and all sort of things. And many of us we all did pretty much everything. TV at that time was the big medium that many of us got into. Harsha and I, for instance, got into TV. And I mean, even TV is unrecognizable, or TV is slightly outdated. So even in our own careers, in the last, when I was running Bloomberg, you were already seeing a sort of decline of legacy media businesses, the way they at least ran. I had magazines in my portfolio, I had a TV in my portfolio, and many of those were already seeing a certain amount of decline, and now it's much faster. Or change. I think decline is one way of putting legacy media down,
It's
but it
adapting.
is
It's
undergoing
changing.
change. Yeah, it's an incredible change.
Definitely.
Yeah,
It,
in 25 years, I don't think it's recognizable. I don't think a newsroom we started in and today's newsroom is probably, it's completely unrecognizable in some ways.
Definitely. I think there is a huge change, and there's lots to learn. And yes, the curriculum does not look anything like what it did 10 or
I'm sure
15
not.
years
Yeah.
ago, which is a part of being in a place where the changes are eclectic, which is great. I do have one question to ask, which is particular about Converge. Is there any exciting development or goals that you are looking forward to, or you'd like to share with the community where you are now?
So yeah, I mean, for us, it's when you're a startup, it's about scaling as quickly as you can. Like I said, our clients are banks, so the number of banks that we can sign up to. But I think the most exciting part of what we are doing right now is expanding outside of India. We just started out in Abu Dhabi, in the Middle East, and in the US. Just start very very baby steps in the US and the Middle East. So that's a big exciting new markets. It's a very different dynamic. Weirdly, much less, I would say, in this space that we are in, the Indian market is much more advanced. Much more risk-taking appetite and much more advanced than any of the other markets we are essentially entering. So that's a good part. But it also means that it's India is also much more regulated than other markets. So we see huge opportunities outside India. So that's the most exciting part for us at Converge right now. That's where most of our focus is going.
Okay.
And of course, turning profitable. I think if you ask any startup, and startups take a long time, at least the space we are in, to become profitable. I'm sure Joji will tell you in the media space, but essentially for us, turning profitable is takes a while, and that's where I think most of us try to sort of focus and trying to.
I feel your pain. Turning profitable is a huge goal,
It's
and
a huge goal.
Forward.
Yeah.
It always moves forward. The definition of turning profitable keeps changing.
Exactly, and that's in media or anything. Exactly.
On that note, Kalyan sir, would the ACG students like to ask a question to Parry? Do we have somebody who has an insightful query?
Or can we take the questions after finish with Joji also?
Sure, that works too. I would like to now hand over the host duties to my batchmate Ranjit, and he shall discuss the same conversation and the same topics with another trailblazer. Please welcome Mr. Joji Thomas Phillips. He's the founder and editor-in-chief of Deal Street Asia. Over to you, Ranjit.
Thank you, Vrinda. Welcome, Joji. Joji, you are a very successful journalist. You have been with a bunch of very prominent media houses. Everybody would know what you would have done there. Tell us about Deal Street Asia. What does it do first? People understand that medium. Joji, you are on mute.
You are muted.
No, we still cannot hear you.
We can't hear you.
No.
Yeah, you're there almost.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just disconnect my. Yeah. No. Yeah. Thanks, Ranjit. I was saying I don't know if I'm successful. That's for the world to decide, not me. But what does Deal Street Asia stand for? So we actually are a media company. We started off in Singapore and Southeast Asia. We track the alternate asset space, which is your private equity or venture capital, funded startups. Now we're increasingly covering stuff like tech. So we are vertical media in the sense that, business media is horizontal. We don't cover everything in the business media space, but we stick to just one segment. And we believe that, whatever we cover impacts all segments, right? Almost all your companies that are being built today, whether in Southeast Asia, India, wherever, there is some element of private equity, venture capital, or credit funding that goes into it. So I think we touch all aspects of the digital world. We started off in Southeast Asia. Then over the years, we built out a small team of reporters in India. We have a team of reporters in China, in Hong Kong, and hopefully this year we should be in the Middle East and Japan. Yeah, that's broadly what we do. So we have three arms. Our focus is on the news space. Over the last couple of years, we're building a data arm. And then we do one big event in Singapore, a flagship event, a small event in Jakarta in Indonesia. So events is a small part of our business. We're predominantly a subscription media. So that's what we do.
Awesome, Joji. What inspired you to start Deal Street Asia? Was there a particular gap in the market that you identified, or was there another defining moment that pushed you into this pursuit?
So I had no plans to start a media company. I was one of the editors with the Economic Times in Delhi. And then my wife got transferred to Singapore. And at that time, I was tweeting about it. Sukumar, who was then the editor now he's the editor with Hindustan Times, but who was now then the editor for Mint, reached out and asked if I was interested in doing something in Singapore. So I came here to launch the first, I think it was also the first Indian newspaper or a business daily that went out and did an edition outside India. So we launched a Mint edition in Singapore, which actually after a year or two went nowhere. And it's not because of, and I think it's because we couldn't figure out like a strategy for Singapore. And I don't think there was much of a focus for Mint in terms of, expanding, because India itself is a huge market. And at that time, Mint used to be a JV with the Wall Street Journal. It used to be called Mint and the Wall Street Journal. And there were two others. This is about this is about a decade ago. There were only one or two startup media in India at that time in the business media space. One was called VC Circle, which is still around, and the other is Your Story. Your Story then was all over the place in the sense that, and they were pioneers in the sense they were trying out new stuff. So Mint and the Wall Street Journal were in talks to buy VC Circle, and I felt that there was nothing like the VC Circle equivalent in this part of the world. So Southeast Asia is very fragmented. The business media is not very strong. Singapore is almost a monopoly. The state-controlled media, we have the Business Times, the Straits Times from the Singapore Press Holdings, and a lot of global media like the Bloombergs, the Reuters, they didn't have a strong focus on, let's say, the private equity venture capital coverage in this part of the world. 10 years ago, I think they were not doing much in when it comes to private equity venture capital, even in India too, the global media. So what eventually happened, I don't know what really went wrong between Mint and the Wall Street Journal. So the News Corp JV got dissolved, and WSG ended up buying VC Circle. And then I felt that there was a gap to do something similar here. I talked to my employer then, which is Hindustan Times Mint.
Okay.
They gave me a little bit of capital to start, about $100,000. It's actually huge. Yeah, a huge amount of capital, and I'm glad they took a bet on me. And then I wrote to two people. One was Vijay Shekhar Sharma, the CEO of Paytm. It's interesting how the world turns. I wrote to him saying I'm trying to do something new, and so it's so funny, right? Because Vijay at that time said, and because Paytm was very small, he said and he had just raised funding from Jack Ma of Alibaba.
Yep.
The funny thing was Vijay went to meet Jack Ma to ask for about $25 million, because $25 million in India was huge 10 years ago. And Jack Ma said 25 is too less. Why don't you take $500 million? Because you're building something big. So Vijay actually came back with $500 million from Jack Ma, and Jack Ma gave him 200 more. So Vijay somebody who wanted to raise $25 million, raised $700 million from Jack Ma. Okay? So after that, I saw the news. I wrote to Vijay saying, I'm doing something in the media space. I need some money. And Vijay interestingly said, Paytm was so small, I didn't have the courage to come to ET. I've seen your Byline.
Okay.
It was so small a company that I always wanted to come and meet ET journalists. Okay. And that's how, and this is somebody who suddenly has from wanting to meet an ET journalist to raising 700 million.
Okay.
And I just got lucky. No paperwork, nothing. Vijay wired $100,000.
As we speak, you are trying to buy back, isn't it? How is the scene now? How the capital, scenario at this point in time?
So I think there is no money in the media. You either have to be somebody committed to media for the long time. If anybody is in it to make any money, I know, we are more than a decade old. We may just about break even, but we're still not profitable. Let's say even if you're profitable this year, right? You start from zero next year because you're subscription media.
Yep.
I think media is one of the toughest businesses to be in. So you can't be in it for the money.
That brings me to the next question. Transitioning from a journalist to an entrepreneur may not be very easy. What mindset shift should one adopt when trying to transition from writing stories to building one's own media business house, specifically media business house?
I think the first thing is, my personal advice would be, I don't think anybody can jump in to start building a media house. I think work for a pretty strong media brand for a while, build your credibility, let the market know you through your work. The transitioning the mindset, I think as journalists, the biggest challenge all of us have, we're all very poor at asking for money. So we come from a journalist background, and I still find it very, very tough to ask for money. That's one. Two, and this is my personal experience, that, when you come from a middle class family with, where your parents actually work salaried jobs, your risk-taking ability is much lower than, somebody who comes from a business background. I think Akar Patel has written a series if you just do a search, I think in Mint or one of the publications on how, if you analyze all the startup unicorns in India, they all come from a certain caste, from a certain kind of background. And you will find that there are very few, highly successful startup founders in India who come from middle classes. If you don't have a business background, because I'll give you an example. So I was a business journalist for over a decade before I launched Deal Street Asia. But even though I was a business journalist, I never seen a term sheet. A term sheet is what investors give you when they invest in. The first term sheet I just signed immediately. I was like stunned that somebody even gave me a term sheet. I was like, oh, okay, happy to sign. And I couldn't read any of that. Like today, you find it all on the internet, but most of the terms in a term sheet I had no idea about. So that is the biggest challenge. And the other challenge I think is, a lot of other things matter. When you're a journalist, you're only chasing scoops, you're only chasing bylines. But building something is very different. Almost all of the tech that you need to build a media house or a media brand is available for very small amounts. You don't need the tech stack at all. As a journalist, we don't look into things like for example, we use PayPal, we use Stripe for subscriptions. For everything, there's MailChimp for your emails. For everything you need, there is a tech solution available. You don't need to really know, build anything on that tech side. As journalists, you are largely focused on stories, but a lot other things matter. Like your brand matters, your distribution matters. There's so many other things that I think that we are not aware. And finally, I think the business side of media, I don't think is taught at all. How do you manage a subscription business? There is so much of data. How do you manage your traffic? Like, how do you read your traffic? All of that, I think, is never taught anywhere. I think those are the biggest challenges in sort of running. And because these become very important. If you have an advertiser, the advertiser will ask you a lot of questions in terms of ROI. What's my ROI? We don't do advertising, but we do a little bit of advertising. But a lot of things that the brand advertising guys ask you, that's actually not taught. I don't know whether it's taught now, but it was not really taught in our times. Mm-hmm. And you need to know all of that to sort of, even if you're doing a small media play, I think all of that is very important.
Joji, that's all from my side. I'll leave it to the floor from now. But then it sounds like very, very interesting story to actually be doing this out of a country where you did not work most part of your life, I guess, or most part of the life that you spent, and then you have a large canvas as well. Just not a country-specific media house. I'll toss this back to Kalyan sir if the students are ready with questions, or even those joining us online, members of the alumni, can please raise their hands and we will facilitate questions.
Good to see Kalyan. We were colleagues at the Indian Express long time ago. I think about 15 years ago or more.
Amir Malik has a question.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Here is a question from Drishti, and the question is for Joji. Joji, she wants to know.
Please go ahead.
Can everybody else please go on mute except for Kalyan sir and Joji? Everybody, please. Kalyan sir, go ahead, please.
Okay, yeah. Okay, question is for Joji. Drishti wants to know, how do you get news from China given the poor press freedom in the country, and how do the reporters cover from there? Do they face any difficulties in that?
So we stick to the business news. I think that is fairly okay. And even within business news for China, we only cover the private equity venture capital scene, which is largely okay. But in terms of forget China, even Singapore, we don't touch anything to do with religion or social issues or political issues, nothing. So I think we are under the radar in China when it comes to, I think we're not big enough for anybody to come after us. But interestingly, our parent companies, right, which is the Nikkei group, they face a lot of scrutiny in China, and even the Financial Times. So even the large media companies find it super tough in the sense that they largely they do very little of non-business reporting when it comes to China.
Kalyan sir, before the next question, there is somebody by the name Amir Malik who's raised hand. Amir,
Hello.
please.
Thank you, Kalyan sir. Thank you, everyone. Good to see our ACG students there. On a lighter note, Joji, I would like to share something with you, which is when I passed out from ACG in 2018. Immediately afterwards, I started an organization of my own. I mean, built a website, a news website, and I named it Street Asia. And when I went to look for the domain and others, I found there is something called Deal Street Asia. I was heartbroken. Who is this person who has thought some similar name years ago? Because I checked your website. And then it was showing something like some years at that point of time. So of course, in COVID, my Street Asia collapsed. But good to see yours running. That is what I wanted to share. That's thank you so much.
Thanks, Amir.
Thanks, Amir. I think the only measure of, if you ask me 10 years down the line, what have you achieved? I think the only thing I can say is survival. Only that matters. Everything else is like, if you're a digital media company, I think your biggest achievement ever is survival, nothing else. You survive, you hit the next year, that is it. Nothing else matters.
Kalyan sir?
A question from me.
Okay.
Question from me. Parry, while in Bloomberg, you were also on the business side. Was that an advantage for you in the transitioning from journalism to entrepreneurship?
Yes, it was. I think there were some things I was familiar with. I was familiar with term sheets, because I had gone through that phase of dealing with the legal side when I was running the business. So it was definitely easier. I was more familiar with some of the aspects of P&L management and strategic sort of thing, because you end up doing that for a large corporate like Bloomberg. But to be honest, it's the world I moved into is very different from the world I was in. So there were nuances that came with it. But the overall, just an understanding of how business runs, yes, it was a huge advantage to be in it. By the way, just to add one bit, I do think that everyone should learn. I think most of you probably agree. Everyone should learn the business side, in my view, of media, because end of the day, that's where the money comes from. You should understand it. I'm not saying you participate in it, but really understand the business side as much as you can, because it's hugely helpful to put put the entire industry into context as well for you, and sort of understand how media works overall. So I think it's overall very, very helpful. I think that curiosity is helpful. I think I can say this to, I think, Harsha and me as well. I think when we started out, where we were in this little company called TV18, which was very little. So a lot of us learned a lot of things quite quickly because it was so small. Everyone had to do everything. So we got exposed to the business side quite a young age, actually. That was really helpful for me as I got onto the business side at Bloomberg, etc. Because I think you were less you kind of spend a little bit time on it. So I would suggest that everyone learn a little bit of that side business.
Kaushik Vaidya has a question. Please go ahead.
Hi, Joji. Hi, Parry.
Hi, Kaushik.
They've known me for many years. The question is to both of you, Joji and Parry. It is, as you all built out your teams and as you all mapped out how you would go about doing what you wanted to do, what philosophies did you adopt in saying, did you all identify verticals that needed to be filled and people with particular skill sets that you would take to them? Or did you all find people with some sort of common purpose that would come together as people that you thought you wanted to be in business with as a set of founders, and then go about people who would then, as a second and third layer, be brought on board as implementers and executors? So I wanted to understand how you all look for people in the teams you all build out to go about doing the business you want to.
Joji, do you want to go first or?
No, Parry, you go first.
Okay. So I think it was, for me, it was fairly new in the sense that I think the first line of, in a technology company like ours, the first line is getting the engineers in, getting the right engineers into the room, the right engineering talent in the room, and, a sort of vision for the product and sort of what the product will look like. That heavy lifting I didn't have to do, thankfully, because my co-founder is a technologist. So I helped where I had to help. That's the kind of first step. Once you're through you sort of get a product definition of some sort, then you start sort of building the next layer, which is the business, and then looking at distribution. In our case, our distribution was through banks, which means that you were kind of dealing with banks. They're very, very slow. They move at a glacial pace, which has all its, all the sort of frustration around it. But it kind of, then you brought people with banking experience onto it. We got a chief business officer who had both payment and banking experience. So you kind of built it around the kind of talent that you need for each one of those roles, and experience. I think that's key. I think I don't think just getting along does it, at least in the world we are in right now, because it's just it's very touch and go. Those relationships with banks was important on the business side. The technology piece, someone who can build complex technologies. AI is a good example, right? If you're building AI layers around it, or small language models that we work on, you needed people who could actually build it. So I think that's how we looked at it.
Yeah, thanks, Parry. For me, okay, there are two things. One, a lot of our backend, which what I mean by backend is the desk in terms of editing. Senior journalists I have are in India. When I say lot, there's about 5-6 of them, and they're all ex-colleagues from the Economic Times. My strategy there was very simple. As Delhi and Bombay traffic grew and all of that, nothing sexist, yeah, but a lot of top women journalists couldn't afford to do that 2 hours of commute to office and back, so they're wasting 4 hours. So my pitch to them was, you say 4 hours, you work from home for me. Maybe I'm not be able to match the ETP, but I give you all the flexibility you want. Okay, and we got the best of talent in India, because once you allow them the ability to save 4 hours in a day, people are willing to take maybe a small salary cut and work from home. So they form the backbone even today. The core of my leadership team is from ex-Economic Times, where I used to work with, and they are able to guide journalists in China or in Southeast Asia, in terms of, they all come with decades of experience in the newsroom. That's one. For the tech, again, we found two great engineers, Alcatel-Lucent, a telco a long time ago, with patent holders in Bangalore, who were struggling to launch a startup, and they needed some money initially, to sort of keep their startup going. So a couple of us small startups signed a deal with them, saying, take care of our backend, the tech stack, while you continue to sort of build your this thing. And again, so that company, one of those engineers, actually, this business in terms of helping startups in the tech side was so lucrative that he split in doing this. He has over 50 clients, employs some 60-70 people in Bangalore today, a company called MobiX. So they take care of the tech stack. So those are the core, that our tech is taken care of, my leadership backend is taken care of. So let's say I have a journalist in the Philippines, a strong, good editor from the ET can guide him or her on terms of stories, what to do. So yeah, after that, it was about building out a team of good reporters across Southeast Asia and Hong Kong. India anyway I think India has the strongest talent pool. I don't know, in Asia, maybe outside Japan. And competition in India is so intense, and the kind of stuff that you learn in India is so intense that I don't think in any other newsroom in Asia you get to do the kind of stuff that you do in India. And the kind of stories that you do in India, I don't think that those journalists you don't get anywhere else. So if you look at Bloomberg or Reuters or any of the media agents, the big media in Singapore, the global one, it's all, everyone, like most of them are Indian journalists. So India produces some of the best talent in the space.
Thanks, both. Kalyan, sir?
Yeah, here is A question from Akriti for Joji. As you said, there's no money in journalism. Is there any way to turn it around?
Is there any way to what?
A basic question.
Sorry, is there any way to what?
Is there any way to transform that situation? No money in journalism. You said no money in journalism.
No, what I meant was, if you compare to the corporate world or other professions, right? People of the same talent can be doing, or let's say you work for some of the technological companies, tech companies, the big tech. People of the same talent do make a lot of money. So I think journalism, if you have a lot of passion, this is a space that you want to be in if you want to make an impact. Two, there is money. If you look at what some of the other people are doing, if you look at some of the Substack, people who are doing their own stuff, who are experts, like over time become experts in their space. Like if you look at, say, there used to be a Bloomberg journalist called Eric Newcomer in the US. He runs a newsletter and single person business. He recently published his numbers. He makes about $2 million a year, one person business. But his content is so good that people pay for it. If you look at Stratchery in Taiwan, again, one person business, he makes about $7 million a year. So if you're very, very good at what you do, I think there is money. And, if you can, people will pay for your expertise.
Ronojoy Mazumdar online has a question.
Hi, yes, thanks. Really fascinating discussion so far. My question is for someone with a few years of experience in journalism and media, and who might be interested in basically following a kind of path that both of you may have taken towards entrepreneurship and towards the business side. How much value would you say such a person might get from basically going to a good B school, going into a solid MBA as a mid-career kind of thing? How much value or not would you kind of see from that kind of route?
I'm sure there is. I mean, I did not go to B school, but I'm sure there's huge amount of value that comes out of going to B school, especially at a mid-career level. I think I've seen people who do it mid-career and get a lot of value out of it. Journalists, I'm talking about, and then move on to the business side. I know, when I was at Bloomberg, I had about two or three journalists in my team. One in China who moved to the business side and who went and did an MBA and then moved on to the business side and actually, frankly, has done amazingly well in that job. So I think there is value. I don't know specifically because I haven't done a business degree myself. But I'm sure there is any education of this kind has value, and of course I think it sort of builds your base in business, and sort of tries and gives you a base in business, which you probably don't have when you're just you're a journalist and you're spending most of your time creating content. So, Joji, I don't know.
No, my personal take is, rather than going to B school, if you can be an early employee of a fast-growing startup, you will learn so much more than any B school can ever teach you. Because every day you're everything from financial modeling, forecasting, P&L, all of that. You don't get to do that anywhere else. From talking to investors, so and many of the businesses in India, Southeast Asia that have like the biggest business have been built by founders who don't have a B school degree. So if you can. I think experience is so much or as valuable as a good business school degree.
Thank you. Super interesting.
Yeah, I've got two more questions. One is from Shreya, and that's to Joji. How many years of experience as a journalist do you think is necessary before going out on their own to start a media house?
See, I think ideally a decade would be great, but I don't know whether people have those timelines today. If you look at Shraddha of Your Story, I think she had very little experience before she started Your Story. The Inc. 42 founder too, I'm just talking about India examples and startup media. I think the Ink42 founder, okay, they have a strong editor-in-chief, but I don't think, the founder had much of a media experience. But if you look at a lot of others, like the Ken, the Morning Context, and several others, the ARC, which was ex-Cap Table team, I'm again specifically to Indian media or Entracker. These were people with considerable level of expertise in other media houses before they sort of launched their own media products.
Yeah, I think I would add it is helpful to have some experience, at least in a sort of in a global sort of way. I mean, in the other markets, I mean, India, Joji correctly pointed out there's a mix of them. But I do think that it is helpful to have a little bit of experience before you venture out, because you kind of know, I mean, it's both good and bad, but you kind of know how you sort of build a little bit of credibility that helps you sort of get a push, further push in, I think. Credibility is important. I think many of the ones who built, like Eric, that Joji mentioned, or Ashley Vance, that just went out with this science podcast, all of them built their reputation. I think they had a huge credibility in the space they got into, and then they built their media sort of properties on it. I think it's helpful, in my view.
Yeah. Credibility and networks also.
Exactly, network and credibility. Of course, with credibility will come the network as well. Yeah, right.
As a good, strong journalist, you have access to a lot of people, which most people, which anybody outside the media, or won't get.
Exactly. And by the way, that entails even people who spent time in media and then moved on to other things. Like for me, my sort of journalism career sort of helped me in my other, when I started out Converge as well, because it sort of opens the doors that you probably wouldn't have been able to open otherwise.
Would Jashad like to comment?
Yeah, he's been cheering.
No.
There's so many US story. I think he's cheering it.
Yeah.
I'll not comment right now.
Kalyan sir, next question.
The next one is from Devyanshi. This is addressed to both of you. What are the hardest adjustments that you had to make transitioning from journalism to selling a product/service?
Well,
Not getting a monthly salary, perhaps?
so
If I'm-
I think that's one of the hard ones.
That's a very difficult one.
I think for me the hardest was, of course, I mean, because you're moving lines, to understand the technology piece was tough for me. I think I had to start from scratch. You were pretty much starting everything. I mean, the media space, I spent a lot of time there, so I knew my way around it. This one, finding my way around was harder, which meant that I had to actually work harder to understand some of the small nuances of what I was doing. So I think that was the hardest part for me. And of course, then moving on from journalism, this is a world that no one knows you. You come from a world where a lot of people know you because you've been in there for very long, to a world where no one really knows you that well. So it's a big sort of, you're almost anonymous. You're coming to a world where you become anonymous again. So, and at age 45, I think 46, that's much harder to digest. It takes a little bit of time to digest.
Yeah, totally agree with Parry. I think the hardest thing, is like let go of a ego. You realize that, for me, like only when you start something, you realize, like as an editor with the Economic Times, people picked your calls, people met you, you had access. And then you thought it was all about you. And then suddenly you start something on your own, nobody picks your call, nobody meets you. And then you realize it was not you, it was a brand. So when you take the brand Economic Times out of you, right, you're actually a nobody. And that was like a stunning thing. So, from just the fact that the EP opened a lot of doors and nobody even wanted to meet you after that was like my biggest learning. At some point, I think it's made me a lot more humble. Today, a lot of people who meet me today, I'm surprised that I speak a lot more gentler, whatever. Because I used to shout a lot in the newsroom, very aggressive as a journalist. I think that was one. To the tech stack, like as Parry pointed out, we came with a print journalism background. You just write your story, mail it to somebody, and you're done. You had no idea what went behind it. So from designing a website, like our website collapsed after 2 months because we didn't know that we had to buy storage in, AWS, Amazon Cloud. So the website was functional, and then the quota got exhausted, and it took us a week to realize, like, how do we get the website back up? Then I met somebody in it. So just the lack of technical expertise was like today. All of those you can search online or figure out all of that. But yeah, these two were the biggest challenges. And then reading a P&L. As you cover listed companies, it's all nicely printed and you can read it. But trying to do your own P&L, audit, compliance, I think, those are things that is like the biggest learnings are there. Singapore is very, very tightly controlled, regulated. So compliance is a huge issue. And these are things you never bothered as a journalist.
But as journalists,
one must tell the students that, the students sitting in the ACJ classroom, both Joji and Parry, they spend a significant amount of time doing journalism before they ventured out to, do what they're doing now. So there's no, two ways about attending classes properly and giving exams properly before and earning a reputation of being a fantastic journalist before going on to do, what they're doing at this point.
Ranjit, you're assuming that Parry and Joji attended classes properly and wrote their exams properly.
Oh, is it? Okay. They didn't. Okay. I stand corrected.
I'll give you an example. What Joji mentioned is so right. I'll give you an example. I had gone for my first meeting after we started Converge, and we had met a banker, and they kept mentioning something called merchant discount rate. I'm not sure you guys will know it. It's a credit card term, and I had to fake my way through it because the one thing you learn as a journalist, you can fake your way through a lot of things. So I faked my entire meeting without knowing what the hell merchant discount rate was. Pretty much the entire meeting. so yeah, that comes out of experience though.
Answer over to you.
Okay.
But it's very reassuring to see that despite all of that, you guys have made it and you can come back and share these stories, which must have been big stress points later. Students can take some aspiration from the fact that there is light at the end of the tunnel, even if you jump after a decade of reputed experience. There will be troubles, but you make it at the end. Alanta, do we have some more questions from the class?
There's one more question here. It's about money. This is from Maya, who wants to know whether there any breakthrough in the revenue model other than the donor dependency or the subscription models, and especially in a country like ours, India, where press freedom is getting increasingly restricted. Will these models be sustainable? Subscription versus donors.
See, my personal take is subscription is the best thing. Then you're not dependent on ad money. But for subscription business to work, it comes down to fundamentally two things. How much value do you add in the reader's personal life or professional life? Unless you're adding value, why should anybody pay for your product? I personally also think that AI will be a game changer because it can bring down costs significantly. So all of the back-end tasks, right? We have a team that, we have two people who manages the back-end of subscription, queries, whatever. Today, AI agents can do all of that. Some of the softwares that we pay for, with AI, I don't think we need to subscribe to all of those softwares. There's a publication called Tech in Asia, bigger than us. They're also cover the startup space. They replaced a whole bunch of their journalists with, when it comes to the releases and writing results. They've been using AI successfully for the last couple of months. So you can actually then go for a few star journalists, who can chase the investigative stories, breaking news, have a much lower cost newsroom. And the savings that you make there will sort of enable you to maybe run a sustainable business. That's my take.
Yeah, I think I kind of agree with Joji, and I think this utility. I think as value is what Joji mentioned, but utility, I think, is people subscribe to something that has utility. So a lot of business journalism people pay for. You pay for Deep Street Asia, you pay for Bloomberg, you pay for things that has a direct utility for you. I think you don't tend to. Most people, save a New York Times, which is probably it's sort of the winner takes all sort of thing, where the winner in this case, the New York Times in the US, has taken it all. You don't see that in many markets, and also there are lucrative markets and there are less lucrative markets. I think India is a less lucrative market even for subscription, because it's still a very low cost market, and people are not willing to pay. I think you get a 10 to 12,000 subscriptions, you sort of already hit the upper level, Whereas in the US and some of those developed markets, those still are growing. But as Joji said, I think new media companies are getting leaner. I don't think the way old media companies worked is how new media companies work. Even at Bloomberg, when I was still there, we were testing out, and now it's entirely done by AI. They're already testing out the commoditized stuff like earnings, etc., fully automated. They've already automated for quite a while. So all that is already going on for a while, and it'll keep reducing the size of the newsroom. All the new companies in the US, like Semaphore, Puck, and all of them are all smaller media companies, and hopefully will be more profitable. I just don't think the old models work anymore. I think it's quite clear.
We'll just take one last question from the classroom. Yeah, please go ahead, Priyanka.
I have a question, and this is for Harsha, Joji, and Parry. What about people who niche down to a very specific sort of a content vertical? So people who are doing only organic farming for your balcony.
Great.
Or, and I am kind of putting the influencer universe into it, because again, content news has become digital. I mean, new media is a fallacy for that matter. But what about people who niche their content down? And I know of newsletters that specifically deal with one makeup product or one tool, or a digital kind of an accessory. What about those people? Because it is profitable. We are yet to see if it is long term, but it becomes very profitable when it is niched down.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a better place to run a business. I don't know how much scale you can build on it, because and frankly, I don't think everyone needs to scale either. Everyone thinks of becoming billion-dollar businesses. I don't think we are going to see many billion-dollar, $2 billion revenue media businesses grow. I think there's nothing wrong in not having them. I think those days are gone, where distribution, and those became big. They became $2 billion, $3 billion companies because they control distribution. Today, you don't need distribution. Today, you already have ways of distributing that you don't need there's no bottleneck on distribution that the large media companies control. So I think it's a much niche areas are where you're seeing growth in pretty much everywhere in the world, where there are the areas where they know their audience, they target the audience, that audience are willing to pay for it and continue to grow. So I think that's probably right. Joji and Harsha.
No, that is the future. For the students of ACJ, if you maybe some examples, right? If you look at, there's a UK media company called Business of Fashion.
Yep.
Okay. Yep. Now it's started by a person called Imran Ahmed, who had zero expertise in fashion, but he just felt that was a space where nobody covered fashion, nobody covered the runway. It's not really news, but then he covered the shows, and then he mixed it up with jobs, because anybody who looks for a job in fashion doesn't advertise on LinkedIn. So no model is coming on LinkedIn to sort of talk about, she wants to be on air, or he or she wants to be on so on. So, and it's a great product. Read the Business of Fashion. Read some of these. Look at Axios in the US. So there is so much or Bill Bishop when it comes to China, right? Everybody in the world reads this guy called Bill Bishop. Okay, he runs a newsletter. And again, a multi-million-dollar product or strategy. So there are these. You can be super niche, and be very successful. You don't need a large team. Maybe have a small team. Yeah, that is the future. Just one last thing. Take a guess. What do you think is the fastest growing or the most successful media company in the world in the last couple of years? Take a guess. Anybody, like, what is the most successful or the fastest growing media company in the world? Anybody want?
Baby do what? Some Peppa Pig, something like children's entertainment.
No, it's OnlyFans.
Yeah, of course.
It is the fastest growing. They paid out $20 billion to creators in the last couple of years, and the dividend of $1 billion.
All right.
But more platform.
Yes, sir. We might have just one more minute. may not be enough time for a question and answer. Closing remarks from you in a minute's time, and then we wanted to finish this in exactly 55 to 56 minutes. Yeah, let's start on time and end on time. Make this a practice.
We still have a couple of questions here. One from Swarnali, who wants to know, having worked in legacy platforms like Economic Times, Business Standard, CNN, and others, how do you feel that there is any kind of are you in a hard competition with your former companies, or you face any hardness from them?
Sorry, I didn't.
In terms of content, are you in kind of any kind of hard competition with the companies which were your former employers?
Joji, probably.
Joji?
No, absolutely. I think in ET, when it comes to business news, in India, it's still ET, the likes of Bloomberg, right? So, but my only thing is there is still space to disrupt business media, identify a niche. While you compete with your former employers, there is still space for disruption.
Yeah, I don't compete with my former employer at all. We're not in that same space.
All right, sir. Kalyan, sir.
One last question, we'll finish it off. Do you think entrepreneurship is the right way to go for independent journalism in India now?
India entrepreneurship, there is still a lot of space. If you can run a very successful Substack or something like that, yeah, it's possible. Or joining any of the startup media in India it's still possible.
I would say just get your business down. I think understand the business really well before you start out. Content does not sell itself. It needs to. You need to understand how that business runs before you get into it. I would suggest you go through that first, I think.
Harsha, shall we?
Yeah, I think there was one question from Amir Malik in the comments.
ROC in Singapore. Yes, we have. Yeah, we have built an entire business around the equivalent of an ROC. Our data business is built around the equivalent of ROC in Singapore. Here it's called ACRA. What it helps you find is reach the cap table. Cap table is all the investors in companies, right? Financials. And a lot of stuff is not. If you look at ROC data in India, you find a lot of information about private companies that is not disclosed. In terms of what stake each investor holds, financials, do they do a down round, valuation. So, yeah, that's a treasure of information. I think there are some ex-ACJ students also are associated with it, but take a look at a company in India called How India Lives.
Yeah.
Okay. Run by a bunch of ex-journalists. I don't see a stronger data team in India compared to How India Lives. Take a look at something called Founding Fuel. Take a look at the work of these people. So they all do really good data stuff. And there's Traction in Bangalore. All ROC data. Take a look at Traction's work.
Kalyan, sir, you're not audible.
Yeah. That's it from our side.
Harsha, shall we wind up? That's about 60 minutes time that we had.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Parry, Joji. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
A fantastic question.